Okay, the hour of 6 is upon us. Will the secretary call the roll, please?
Sure. Directors Huang, Akbari, Sethy, Weed,
Here.
and Gunther.
Here. Director Sethy is en route, and Director Huang will not be with us this evening. Director Akbari, will you lead us in our salute this evening?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
On public comments? No members of the public. Okay, I wonder why. This evening we have a special presentation.
Yes. It is with great pleasure that we have a representative from California Special Districts Association to present the District Transparency Certificate of Excellence Award by the Special District Leadership Foundation. And please come on up.
So you've all seen me here before because you've earned a lot of our certificates. Previously I was here for your Certificate of Distinction, which is also a district-wide award. This time it's your Transparency Certificate. You've earned that one before too, but it's reviewed every 2 years. So thank you for staying current on it. I apologize, but these talking points are going to be a review. You've heard them before, but there are formal talking points for this award, so I'm going to quickly go through them and just remind you a little bit about our foundation and the process. So the Special District, I'm sorry, once again, my name is Colleen Haley as well.
Sorry about that. I should have introduced you, Colleen.
Colleen Haley, California Special Districts Association, Bay Area Network Field Coordinator. So anyways, about the Special District Leadership Foundation, the 501c3 not-for-profit arm of CSDA, dedicated to promoting excellence in special districts through recognition programs, the highlight and implementation and focus on implementation and governance best practices. So there's currently 2, as I mentioned, the District of Distinction Award and the Transparency Award, and then there's 2 for individuals in case board members would like to earn yours. We have a district recognition certificate for board members. And then for high-level staff, we have a certificate for district and administrators. So that's something to consider if you'd like to go through that process as well. But we're here for the Transparency Certificate. So this program was created in 2013 as an effort to promote transparency in the operations, I can't talk tonight, and governance of special districts to the public and to provide special districts with the opportunity to showcase their efforts in transparency. So the basic requirements, which of course all of you have met, are the current ethics training certificates for board members and timely filing with the state controller's financial transactions and compensation report, website requirements, which includes posting the board meeting schedule, district's mission statement, current audit, budget information, and the board of directors rosters with terms of office on the district's website. Outreach requirements, which we have to do 2 of the following, either a regular district newsletter, or informational public hearing and or a community transparency review. Therefore, why is transparency important? Because, of course, the public has a right to access open government. Special districts, regardless of type or size, are public agencies that use public money, provide public services. The district's business is the public's business. Transparency means the district's open, accessible, engages the community, easy access to district information through mediums like a website, provides for opportunity for constituents to better understand their district, and because transparency allows for accountability. Therefore, on behalf of the board and the staff of the Special District Leadership Foundation, it's my pleasure to present the District Transparency Certificate of Excellence to the Alameda County Water District in recognition of your efforts to promote transparency, the operations, and governance of your district. Congratulations. And then I would like to ask special permission to take a picture with the board with your certificate to place on our SDLF Facebook page and CSDA Facebook page.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe in front of the flag or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. You're the boss.
Well, Director Sethy's taking the lead on this. Let him hold the...
Oh, my goodness. He needs to hold it.
have my talking points.
I think you got the, I think it'll work best down there, John, where you are.
Any kind of-
This is the, thank you, Colleen. This is the district of transparency.
And it's your renewal.
Right, renewal. So as board president in 2014, I made it the mission of the board to get this, and then as board president last year to get the district of distinction.
And every year you've been current, so
So we've been making progress.
you've been making a lot of progress. And encouraging others to do so as well. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much.
Colleen, can you get in a photo, please? We'll put you in our social media.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, make that comment. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul. I'm glad your arrival was perfect. Okay, moving on.
Mm-hmm.
We'll pass on to the consent calendar. Do we have, would any board member like to add an item to the consent calendar?
I'll make the motion to add items 5.1 through 5.9 to the consent calendar. And if I may, President Gunther, just make a quick comment on item 5.5.
Okay, go ahead.
Item 5.5, I have previously recused myself on items that related to the Maori Well to the Maori Well facility because of a conflict of interest with a real property that fell within 500 feet. But I have since, I no longer have an interest in that property, and therefore I feel comfortable voting on this particular issue.
Very good.
I'll second the motion.
Second, a motion. Secretary call roll for...
Directors Huang, Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Aziz,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. We have a motion to amend, to accept the consent calendar as amended.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
We have a second.
Okay. Directors Huang, Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Aziz,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. Moving on, item 5.10.
Yes, item 5.10 involves the authorization of a professional services agreement for the development of a business continuity program, and our acting operations and maintenance manager, Mike Wickham, will make a super brief statement to introduce the staff person that will be making a very brief presentation on this item this evening.
Good evening. This evening, Mr. Reed will be making a brief presentation on item 5.10, which is the authorization of professional service agreement for the development of a business continuity program.
Hi, hello everyone. Everyone in here knows me, but my name's Jake. I just got back from a California Utility Emergency Association conference, and no surprise, the topic was campfire last year, and we just listened to a couple firefighters and water utility, Cal Water, who was very involved, talk, and just reminded me, it made me appreciative, and also reminded me of the seriousness. Not that I don't take it seriously already, but really brought it home, because these guys were significantly affected by these disaster responses. So I'm really appreciative of the district's support and effort so far, including a possible upcoming deployment to help PID out. I think it'll be really beneficial for the deployment. All right, the business continuity program. The agenda, talk about the need for a business continuity program, research and analysis, scope of work. We'll review the scope, review proposals that were submitted, talk about the selected consultant, and the next steps after today. As you know, one of our strategic goals is 1.3, continuously improve emergency preparedness and response capabilities. The need for a business continuity program was initially identified in district's local hazard mitigation plan. The local hazard mitigation plan was developed by stakeholders in all departments of the district. Developing a business continuity program was identified as the #1 action the district stated it would take to help improve emergency response capabilities. If the plan is completed, we can include the completion of the plan in our 5-year update. So if the business continuity plan is completed, we can include that in the local hazard mitigation plan update, which will allow for us to continue to apply for public assistance and grant funding with FEMA and Cal OES. The district's Office of Emergency Services also held a board workshop last year. During the workshop, the board expressed interest in having a concept of operations. That was written in the scope and also in the proposal. Also last year, many know the American Water Infrastructure Act was passed. A portion of the act requires a lot of plans and procedures on how to respond to both man-made and natural disasters. It is quite the act, but this plan will definitely check a bunch of boxes towards compliance. Research and analysis. Research and analysis was conducted on the best program to develop for the district. Research was conducted on how to meet the needs expressed by exec staff and board members, and develop a program that is implementable with our system and culture. It was determined the best program is one that will be built from the bottom up as opposed to the top down to get necessary detail in plans, empower and familiarize work units with plans, and ensure work units have something to reference after a catastrophic disaster. In fact, that was one of the major points today when talking about emergency preparedness was you got to get the troops involved. The boots on the ground for us, the field staff. If they're not engaged before the disaster, it makes it that much more difficult during the disaster. It was also determined that it would be preferable to have a consultant who has developed a business continuity plan for water utilities and has experience developing business continuity plans for local governments in California. It turns out when I was looking at the consultants out there, many of them have business with businesses, with non-government agencies. So there were a few that have written plans for local governments and even fewer that local governments that govern a water utility system. Scope of work. The scope of work was then written for the development of a program. Scope of work will be broken up into 2 phases. Highlight on this slide is phase 2. I'll give a quick review of phase 1. That's the center of gravity, which is the business continuity plan and the program that supports it. Phase 1 phase 1's deliverables are develop an approach to develop the program. A technical memorandum regarding the approach will be produced. Conduct a business impact analysis and risk assessment. That process includes identifying work units and their mission essential functions, conduct an analysis of how the work units are affected by all hazards, prioritize mission essential functions, and then produce a draft and final business impact analysis and risk assessment report. Phase 2 deliverables, which you see on the screen there. After we do the business impact analysis, the risk assessment, we got a concept, we know what the disaster looks like and what we need to do. We'll develop the program. So the program is the plan, which is center of gravity for the program, administration of the program, maintenance plan for the program. What I didn't include on there was training to exercise the plan, and then administrative guidelines to support the program. The plan itself will have mission essential functions. Those are the prioritized functions of approximately 35 work units within the district. Concept of operations. Given a disaster at a particular location, what resources do we have and what capabilities do we need to achieve objectives? That will address resources that will be addressed will be fuel, power, energy, food, lodging, base camp, supplies, equipment, mutual aid. Succession planning, who has what responsibilities and duties when others aren't at work for taking care of their family or whatever. Alternate facilities, when facilities that are being operated or staffing people aren't available, what facilities will we use to run our utility system? And alert notification procedures, burst area notification system, cell phones, etc. Other chapters not included in the plan, or other chapters included in the plan but not on the slide include delegation of authority, vital records and data, tests, training and exercises, devolution, and reconstruction.
Excuse me, on that last comment, you said not included is reconstruction?
Is included.
Is included.
Sorry, I got a little twisted up there. Review of the scope of work. I did review the scope of work with the exec staff and then the Operations and Maintenance Water Quality Committee. The review with the Ops and Water Quality Committee, there was a few statements that were noted and included in the scope, and received as proposed to include a statement in the plan on what the district's core mission will be post-disaster, critical staff availability post-disaster, and include how employees communicate with each other post-disaster. So again, those desires will be in the product. It should be noted, East Bay Municipal Utility District's business continuity manager, the only water utility business continuity manager in this region, and considered an expert in the field in general, did conduct a peer review of this scope of work. Once the scope was scoped out, the plan was posted, or the RFP was posted, and we got our proposals in. We had a technical evaluation team consisting of a member of each department in the district review the proposals. After reviewing the proposals, Jacobs was selected. A little bit about Jacobs, I figured I'd highlight the experience. We lean pretty heavily on experience. In particular, two people of quite a large team they assembled. I wanted to point them out. Todd Anderson, he'll be a project manager. He has worked for Santa Clara Valley Water District as an engineer. Since he has been employed by Jacobs, he has conducted vulnerability assessments and written security and emergency response plans for local water utilities, including Zone 7, SFPUC, and East Bay Mud. Todd has a high level of knowledge of the function of water utility systems and special districts. Megan Ellis, a certified business continuity planner. She will be a risk analyst and task leader. She has conducted vulnerability assessments, developed business continuity plans, emergency response plans for East Bay Mud and SFPUC. As I stated earlier, the scope of work will take place in 2 phases. It's approximated. Phase 1 will be about 7 months, and Phase 2 about 8 months. If the board authorizes a professional services agreement for the development of a business continuity program, contract will go in place pretty soon after. Phase 1 will begin. In approximately 7 months, Phase 1 will be complete, and we will return to this board to discuss the program development approach, the business impact analysis and risk assessment report, and objectives of developing a business continuity plan and overarching business continuity program in Phase 2. In approximately 13 months, Phase 2 will be completed, and we will return to the board to discuss the business continuity program itself and how we will implement that program within the district. That completes my presentation.
Questions, comments?
Will there be a presentation to the board between Phase 1 and Phase 2 with a go, no-go, or revisions?
Yeah, Phase 1, at the completion, it's in the scope and will be in the contract. They'll come here to give you the Phase 1, myself and the Jacobs, to review the approach that we're taking, and also the results of the business impact analysis risk assessment, and our plan to develop the program in Phase 2.
You know, it's been a number of years working on the various types of different levels, and sometimes it can become very bureaucratic and programmatic, and lacks a real-world connection or metrics. I'd encourage you in your discussions, particularly as you go into as part of Phase 1, is to develop some metrics for the response. The word recovery is not included here. We talk about continuity.
Right.
And so to be able to restore operations may be different in the mindset of a corporate world than business continuity, where they want to keep their computers and telephones working. Where you'll have real physical damage that we're going to have to repair. I'd hope that they recognize that this is a district-wide response, not just the operations and maintenance, but a little bit of finance. But everyone in the organization is going to have to be repurposed to do it effectively. And I would wonder if there might not be some efforts that we could put in place now rather than putting everything on hold for a year and a half while we go through this planning phase. Is there something that we might, as a district, be able to do that could be parallel with this bigger study? Because it strikes me that it's fairly easy to say we need to do a 10 to 20-fold increase in our operational capabilities, and what assets do we have in place to do that? Those type of issues don't require a $250,000 study to tell you that's what you need. So I would encourage us to look at what we might be able to do in a parallel to this effort, and actually beginning to develop some assets and capabilities to be able to do it, and find a budget that supports that. So this $250,000 is great. I would be happy to spend another $250,000 buying the assets necessary to have in place that's going to be necessary to do let's say a minimum of a 10-fold increase in operations, whether it be pipes, fill, equipment, at all, because you'll be able to you'll get all the support you can gainfully employ. And that's where I think we're weak. How do we gainfully employ a 10-fold increase in support if we showed up on your door tomorrow with no assets, with all of the supply chains shut down? So that's my take. Thank you.
Jake, in preparation for tonight's meeting, I went through the American Water Infrastructure Act, and one thing I would ask is that as you go through the act, go through development of the consultant's recommendations and everything, much like the staff ties elements of our strategic plan to actions that they're developing on some program, I think it might be good to see what elements of the act we're meeting throughout the documentation that's prepared. So we directly tie it to each bullet of the act that's important. Number two, I'm going to express a concern about the timeline for getting the study done. I'm not sure why it takes 15 months to get work done on a project like this, which in all trueness is a smaller consulting contract, $250,000. What I'm concerned about is at the last workshop that we had, and I'm not sure if you were there, I mentioned the Disaster Recovery Reform Act that was passed by Congress last October. And last week I sat in on the FEMA presentation for the National Public Infrastructure, whatever they call it, Disaster Mitigation Program. And they're just developing that program right now, and they're asking for inputs from potential recipients of, what are billions of dollars of grant money for preventive purposes, where disasters can be expected, right? And so the window for the grant application process is opening October through January of this year, which means that if we were to properly apply for that grant program, we really should have this kind of study completed ahead of time or concurrently with trying to apply for the grant program. So my question to the consultant would be, why is it not possible to get the study done sometime by the fourth quarter of this year, calendar year, and be prepared in a timely way to make a grant application under this new program that Congress has funded? I think that would be the right way to go about it, because as the program administrators were talking about last week, they want districts and agencies and cities, they kept repeatedly saying, think out of the box. Tell us what you need to stockpile on ahead of time. I think when you go through a study like this, we're going to be able to put in a grant application for, as Director Weed was saying, all kinds of equipment. We may need backhoes, heavy equipment that are in storage, pipes, other equipment. And so I would like to see this study kind of done in a concurrent way with planning for the other, the grant application under the new Disaster Recovery Reform Act. I'm not sure if that's possible. Anybody want to comment?
So we did discuss that, Director, when you last brought up the possibility for funding through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. And I did look at that again, and a little bit of background. We have received some funding from that before in public assistance. It's more of reimbursement money, not necessarily grants. And we have reviewed applying for grants, the district's grant team. We just, at the time, didn't think it was appropriate. Does this plan need to be in place to make us eligible for grants? No, it's a local hazard mitigation plan is the only thing that needs to be in place to be eligible. As far as if we do apply for grants or where we want to, as the grant committee currently does, where do we want to offset our capital improvement program? That's generally what we look at. We look at the capital improvement program and...
So, you know, you're the expert here, but let me tell you what I learned.
Sure.
We've had the mitigation program in effect in the past, but people applied to the program for grant money after an event. This is the first time last October that Congress passed appropriations for preventive purposes.
Pre-disaster hazard mitigation.
Right, and they call it the BRIC program. And so this is a new initiative by Congress to help communities out with preventive programs. One other thing that was asked on the call, because there were a lot of questions that came in, was clarification on all of the components of how to make for community readiness. And one of them, of course, is water. And the question was, is this only addressing portable water needs like bottled water, trucked water in? And one of the program administrators said, no, this also includes water infrastructure. So, you know, I'm thinking that we may qualify on our the spinal portion of our water mains because that's essential to the entire district, that might qualify. Again, they said, think out of the box. Tell us what you need and come up with ideas. The worst that can happen is that we say no. And so I look at what you're doing here. I think this is really a good effort. But if we could compress the time so that we're in sync with the application period for the other program, that would be really good.
So a two-part answer there, Director. I did review the documents you say, and I feel pretty confident if the grant committee team decided to pursue funding to offset our capital program, we could apply. There's nothing that in the BRIC initiative that changes our we're not eliminated from the application process.
Yeah, but the application period is October through January of this year.
Right.
So, what I'm hearing from Director Sethy is if it's possible to include in phase one of the scope an assessment of some items where there may be ways for us to leverage grant opportunities, that we ask the consultant to make that part of their thinking as they go through the phase one process. And since phase one is scheduled for about 7 months, it's not asking too much to accelerate that with an eye on including potential for grant applications that they could help us with. The grant committee is fine at looking at sort of what projects we have already planned and see, okay, where do the square pegs, where are the square hole, that we can fit that into. But this is a little different because your study will be looking at things that the grant committee wouldn't be aware of because we don't necessarily have a plan yet.
Okay, yeah, I understand.
So
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm hearing from the director, and I think we can look into that with the consultant.
Okay.
Did I capture that?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me make a quick issue on semantics. In disaster preparedness, the word plan is a real challenge because you have no idea what's going to happen. It's hard to plan on the unknown, but you develop capabilities and protocols. And this is a collection of, I know we fall back into using the term plan time and time again. It's where there's not a specific plan. It's identifying a different way to operate and capabilities and protocols that you would do in times of a disaster.
Agreed. We're looking at potential scenarios and then developing contingencies to help best prepare ourselves for them without knowing exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it is about capabilities. Totally agree.
Just the last point, I'm in agreement with Director Weed. If they can list out all of the potential equipment that we would need in a disaster that we could warehouse, I think spending money on that is well worth it. And whether we get a grant for it doesn't matter or not. We may have to spend the money ourselves, but we need to, I think that would behoove us to do that.
That can be done, yeah.
Let me add a slight nuance to that. Equipment has the ability to be transported in mass quantities to a location. And there's, when you tap into your mutual aid, a lot of equipment comes with it. But what's really difficult to get are the other basic assets such as pipes, backfill, maybe the ability to take care of the places to dump things, the storage. So it's those assets that we now have enough to do on a regular basis, and maybe we could double our operational intensity for 30 days. But if you talk about a 20-fold increase in that same operational intensity, that's a much bigger supply warehouse and better ways to be able to monitor what you have and where you have it. Barcoding, and all those things come into play because it really is a supply challenge, a logistics challenge. And you've got
Right. Those gaps will be pointed out after the business impact analysis. The supplies, the staffing needed, where to house everything, and that will be, once we understand what that is, what the post-disaster looks like, what we need, it'll be included in the plan.
How do we bed down 1,000 people arrive at your door
Right.
and feed them? How many air mattresses do we have in our EOC today? It goes from there.
You don't want to sleep on the seafoam green carpet here, Director?
Thanks.
Understood.
Director Akbari?
Great. Well, I'm definitely supportive of the BCP, and I appreciate you coming here and giving us a presentation about it as well. Not just to the board, to the public as well. I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
That hopefully I can run through pretty quickly. When was the last time our agency developed a business continuity plan or a similar document?
The plan development was initiated, I want to say, I don't know the exact year, but I want to say about 6 years ago. And it was initiated in a similar fashion, and which was the business impact analysis, and it didn't really move forward from there. So there are some materials in the some documents. Those documents were written in the scope to be reviewed as well by the consultant.
Are there documents that predate that, maybe for a particular department, if not agency-wide?
Those are the only documents I'm aware of, and they were, it was a district-wide effort, so it affected every department.
And in our definition of disaster, my understanding is we're talking about natural and man-made disasters, which is quite broad, of course. But does that include, say, kind of a technical disaster if there was a hack?
Yeah, totally.
Okay,
Yeah.
so all of these things are included within the scope of this program, right?
Yeah, so the big level is man-made or natural, and for man-made, a cyber attack's one of them. They call that a malevolent act. Yes, that will be included.
Okay.
It's interesting you bring that up because generally what you find out is you think, our business is water, so you think when we look at mission essential functions, okay, production is going to be up there. But when I reviewed other districts and their result, like what's the priorities for your working is, IT's right up there now too, because really nothing operates this day and age without IT. And then the cyber hack needs to be looked at. Everything's just the Internet of Things is tied to it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, especially for bringing on like smart meters and additional infrastructure like that, then making sure that we are prepared for a cyber attack is going to be very key to our business continuity. I was also curious, you mentioned that East Bay Mud is the only other agency that has kind of a dedicated manager for their business continuity program. What are other agencies doing? Are they just developing a plan similar to ours, but they don't have a dedicated administrator for that plan, or how are they managing it?
Hey, there's not a whole bunch of plans out there.
Okay.
And so that's the only person that's dedicated manager at East Bay Mud. As far as the other utilities, without giving any names, there's not a whole bunch of plans. And for the plans that are out there, generally they're outdated on a shelf and they're not exercised to see if they actually, if they're realistic. And so it's definitely an effort that not a whole bunch of water utilities have undertaken.
And is that just in the Bay Area, or are you?
I'm talking about regional. Yeah, that's who I worked with the most when it comes to, and in particular the bigger agencies that are more proactive.
Sure.
If I can add a point here to what Director Akbari is saying, in that FEMA call, nearly all of the discussion was about pre-mitigation for fire, flood, tornado, and hurricane. I never heard the word earthquake mentioned once, and yet that's the potential big disaster that we're facing right here. So once again, they were saying, think out of the box, whatever it is you need, plan ahead, tell us what it is, because we want to get those communities up and running as fast and as quickly as possible.
Yeah, totally.
So there aren't a lot of water districts that are facing earthquake.
Right.
But I think you're going to see a new urgency of applications for where they have threats of fire, especially in California, coming back from where you just came from.
Yeah, I agree.
Let me ask that be assured that there's a public communication and information aspect, which is important to this to the response plan as well, and that we incorporated that with the automation of the data and the ability of people to track what our operational responses are. I don't think that's a security issue. It's generally stopped when people say, can we let that information out? I think you can in an emergency. Second, there are types of equipment which in our procurement practices we can look at acquiring, which are very helpful in a time of an emergency. A vacuum excavator is preferable to a backhoe if you need to get something done quickly and efficiently, but it's more expensive. So there are some types of, that is part of your investment strategy, comes into play. So So it really is a truly broad element of how you repurpose the entirety of your staff and recognize you're going to be doing that with as many as a third of the staff not present, taking care of their own personal families.
Right. It's what's happening in Paradise right now. I mean, what you're talking about is, Jonathan's now the GM, their finance manager is now the GM. A very young utility worker got promoted very quickly to be in charge of operations because they lost not only their water utility, they lost their homes. Sorry, Bob, I wasn't trying to suggest anything when your next eval comes up.
It's all right.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. They actually thought about preparedness there because they've had a few fires. But the concept you see in your director is exactly what's happening there. Dealing with logistics, dealing with managing all this mutual aid that's coming in. Finance, they have no revenue. They went from 40,000 people to 5. It's a very comprehensive planning that needs to take place.
Another point which you just raised, which is probably not part of any disaster plan, is the problems with the dysfunctional rate structure and what Paradise has run into with their revenue loss by not matching their fixed costs with fixed revenues and variable costs with variable revenues.
Okay.
I have
Director
just
Akbari.
one more point. It's kind of related to Director Weed's first comment on business continuity. I would certainly include in their communication with the community, because I think business continuity is only going to be successful if we have the buy-in from our customers as well, and that they understand what we're working on in response to a disaster and can set expectations for them as well. And so I think, I don't know if that's included in the plan. If it's not, I certainly would add that portion in as well.
We can make that happen.
Wonderful. Thank you.
No problem.
Without further comments, I'd like to comment that I agree with Director Sethy, Director Weed, Director Akbari, that the establishment of supplies, we have a history of doing that previously. We've done some, not as much as we certainly could use. But Director Weed's right. Equipment, people, we could set up the mutual aid arrangements with them, but when it comes to the pipes, it comes to the backfill, it comes to locations, we need to have that. And I think there's an opportunity, it sounds like there's opportunities to go pursue some grant money to get some of this stuff. So maybe we'll get lucky, get successful, and I think we can get to be successful again. I have full faith in our staff. So, further comments?
So there is a staff recommendation, and that is by motion authorize the general manager to execute an agreement for professional services with Jacobs to develop a business continuity program for an amount not to exceed $228,195.
We have a staff recommendation. Do we have a motion?
I'll move the staff recommendation on item 5.10.
I'll second.
Motion second. Secretary, call the roll.
Sure. Directors Huang, Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Gunther.
All right. Moving on, 511.
511 involves a resolution authorizing an extension to the appointment of retired annuitant to a limited-term critically needed position, and Manager of Water Resources, Laura Heides, will be presenting this item.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. The government code generally requires that a retired CalPERS annuitant be reinstated to active CalPERS membership upon employment by a CalPERS covered agency, unless the appointment meets certain requirements of the government code. Accordingly, the board previously approved a resolution for the appointment of Stephen N., a retired annuitant, to a limited-term critically needed position to perform some specific narrowly defined duties, and certified that the appointment meets the government code requirements, which exempt a retired CalPERS annuitant from the reinstatement requirement to not be reinstated to active CalPERS membership. At that time, staff indicated that this appointment was anticipated to be from January 2nd, 2019 through July 2nd, 2019 on an as-needed basis. At this time, staff requests that Mr. N's appointment as a limited-term retired annuitant be extended through December 31st, 2019, to provide as-needed support for specific narrowly defined duties, which would also meet the government code requirements for a retired annuitant to not need to be reinstated to active CalPERS membership. So the recommendation tonight is by motion, adopt a resolution authorizing an extension to the appointment of retired annuitant Stephen N. to limited-term critically needed position. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
None. Have we discussed this with Mr. N yet?
Yes, we have. He's agreeable to it.
Is his psychiatrist agreed to this?
Is his wife agreeable?
Without comments, then, we have a motion.
I'll move to staff recommendation.
Second.
Directors Huang, Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye.
Okay, so item 512, if I may. Resolution adopting the fiscal year 2019-20 and fiscal year 2020-21 budget and the 25-year capital improvement program. And beginning this item for us will be Manager of Finance, Jonathan Wunderlich.
All right, good evening, members of the board and public. On May 15th, the board reviewed the draft budget at a public board workshop. The budget proposed for board adoption this evening is substantially similar to the budget that was reviewed at the workshop. It does, however, incorporate a few updates based on recently available data, and Mr. Aum will cover those updates in his presentation. The main point I would like to emphasize regarding the proposed budget is that it stays within the cost estimates included in the financial plan prepared as part of the recent rate-setting process. This means that the proposed budget does not impact future rate projections. And so with that introduction, I will turn it over to Mr. Aum, the district supervising financial analyst, to begin his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich. Good evening, President Gunther and members of the board. I'm Sidney Aum, supervising financial analyst. The agenda for the presentation for you this evening is to review the budget and provide the budget updates since the review the budget and then the financial planning model metrics as well as staff presentation. I'm just wondering if this is the right presentation.
Yep.
Or
I think so.
okay. The proposed budget includes several key budget assumptions. The forecasted water revenues are based on 34 million gallon per day, average water demand in fiscal year 1920 and fiscal year 2021. Implementation of previously approved rate increase of 4% to both the commodity and service charge effective March 1st, 2020. Employee wages are consistent with the recent labor negotiation, with 3% cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 1920 and fiscal year 2021. San Francisco PUC wholesale water rates remain unchanged for the next 2 fiscal years. And the district will continue the evaluation of initiative to ensure water supply reliability. The proposed budget includes funding for the Delta conveyance projects, Los Vaqueros reservoir expansion, and the joint purified water feasibility evaluation projects.
Sidney?
Yes.
I would like to add something because we had 2 directors, Director Weed and Gunther, missing from that last budget workshop. So I made a request that we also park some dollars aside for completing the study on Lake Del Valle and for studying the needs that we had on the South Bay Aqueduct.
I believe at the workshop our staff indicated that the budget had already included some of the funding for that study.
Yeah, I believe, Director Sethy, the intent was to bring those items back for more detailed discussion at the July workshop to discuss water supply alternatives.
Right.
And then to the extent we felt it was necessary after that discussion, to the extent the current budget didn't include enough money for that, we would talk about a budget amendment to add more funding for those initiatives.
That pretty much summarizes my request. I just wanted to make sure, since we're passing a 2-year budget, that we have our eye on completing those studies and that there's money available for it in the budget. And I wanted to make sure that Director Weed and President Gunther understood I'd made that request.
Thank you, John, for clarification.
If I could add quickly on two items you mentioned. One was Lake Del Valle. It's my understanding that San Francisco and Bosca are evaluating Lake Del Valle as part of their response to the unimpaired flows in the San Joaquin River. The Hetch actually goes underneath Lake Del Valle. It's a state water project property, so we'll see. That may be some evolution. The other comes in that each of these items in that list, including Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion, there will be a number of points during the process, during the year, that we will make a determination whether we go forward or not, will or not, particularly if the cost of Los Vaqueros remains at a rate of 7 to 8 times what the South Bay Aqueduct water currently is. The $2,600 raw water cost is pretty high. So these are not locked. These are numbers that are subject to ongoing evaluations of the various projects and whether we step in or step out.
Absolutely. There are a number of off-ramps available to us for the Los Vaqueros expansion project, and I'm sure, Director Weed, that you recall that some of those high cost per acre feet numbers were related to Bosca and the way they would be using water potentially from that project, and are subject to huge variability depending on how many partners are in the project, as well as how the partners would use that water. And Bosca's assumptions, frankly, result in the most expensive water.
Incredible. The Joint Purified Water Feasibility Evaluation is one that I did not support, and I would hope that there'd be a reality check there as well, because I assume the water is going to have to, given the poor, low recovery that our staff had earlier suggested on the water that we put into the groundwater basin. When you're talking about $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 an acre foot, it's getting pretty expensive. And why, at some point, hopefully we can do a reality check before we spend another $850,000 on the effort. Thank you.
Thank you. So the proposed budget includes 4 key revisions since the May 15 workshop. The water purchase costs for the state water projects increased based on the new estimate provided to us by the Department of Water Resources. $996,000 is added for fiscal year 1920, and $411,000 added for fiscal year 2021. $60,000 added for the Maury and PT well fields pumping equipment replacement project for the first year. The budget also includes $50,000 for public outreach initiative for the AMI projects and other potential outreach program that staff will work with the Legal and Intergovernmental and Community Affairs Committee on the ideas and the plans. The district received additional property tax revenue from the county for the current fiscal year 18-19, and the adjustments have been made for the proposed budget year 1920 and 2021. That's based on the most recent property tax remittances from the county. The result is $868,000, added for fiscal year 1920, and $898,000 for fiscal year 2021 for the 1% tax allocation portion. And the changes to the override tax has included part of the revenue and expense true-up. Here's the budget comparison chart showing the fiscal year 17-18 actuals, the fiscal year 18-19 amended budget and the estimated actual, and the two proposed fiscal year 19-20 and 2021. This is looking at the total revenues. The fiscal year 18-19 estimated actuals is 3.2% higher than the amended budget, so the revenue had come out a little higher than what we anticipated. For the proposed two-year budget, the total revenue is at $149 million for fiscal year 1920 and $150.9 million for fiscal year 2021. The district anticipates receiving $21 million in grants and reimbursement for our Fish Passage projects. On the expense side, fiscal year 18-19 estimated actuals are in line with budget. The total expenses for fiscal year 19-20 is at $154.8 million, and for fiscal year 2021 is $170.7 million. Just want to point out that capital projects, expense projects, and customer jobs combined for a total budget of $108 million over the next two fiscal years. This is our total cash balance. We expect to end the current fiscal year 18-19 better than we anticipated. When we developed the budget for the mid-cycle, we had thought that our beginning fund balance would be $138.4 million, but we ended the year fiscal year 17-18 better than we anticipated. So we started off the 18-19 fiscal year better at the beginning fund balance of $153.5 million. So our ending fund balance is at $161 million, which is $8 million above what we thought it would be. For the proposed two-year budget, the ending cash balance is $156.8 million in fiscal year 19-20 and $150.5 million in fiscal year 2021. The proposed budget also includes $14.5 million in debt issuance to fund approximately 50% of the AMI projects, and that also helps with the cash flow. This is looking at the district's reserve and debt indicator. The main takeaway here is that the proposed reserve is meeting or exceeding the target reserve that the board approved earlier this evening. And the debt coverage ratio of 6.65 and 6.49 are well above the required or the policy target of 2.0 for debt service coverage. This pie chart shows a breakdown of the labor component of our total general fund expenses. For fiscal year 19-20, the labor is 36% of the general fund expenses, or $51.2 million of the $142.2 million. This is the 2021 general fund expenses. The labor make up 33% of the total general fund expenses, or $51.5 million of the $156.2. This is one of our CIP chart that was shown at the workshop. This is the proposed 10-year CIP by program. And this is to highlight the two major programs that are in the major implementation phases right now. The top is the AMI projects. That totals $28 million over 4 years. And the fish passage projects total $42 million over the next 3 years. The main replacement program in green averages about $10 million annually. The next four slides will show the metrics from our financial planning model. This first one is our general fund ending balances. This is looking at our ending fund balances, the calculated ending balances compared to the target balances. For the fiscal year 1920 and 2021, the ending fund balances are $34 million over the reserve target. Over the next several years, the ending fund balances will drop slightly, and then we'll pick back up in fiscal year 25-26. This is due primarily to the increase in our CIP program over the next several years. This next metric show the debt coverage ratios. The red line is the target ratio at 200%, and the dotted purple line is the calculated ratios. And for fiscal year 1920 and 2021, the debt coverage ratio is over 600%. And the district will maintain a healthy debt coverage ratio going forward, above 500% compared to the target. This metric compares the operating expenditure revenues to the operating expenses, including the depreciation. The blue bar is representing the operating expenses, and the red bar is the operating revenue. The main takeaway here is that the operating revenue covers the operating expenses for the proposed fiscal year 1920 and 2021. This metric is slightly different. It compares the rate revenue to the revenue requirement. The revenue requirement is basically the amount of revenue that's required to cover our operating expenses. Looking at this chart, it shows that the rate revenue will cover the revenue requirements, but when we add CIP, the general fund CIP to it, the district will rely on other funding sources to fully fund both the revenue requirement, which is our O&M expenses, and the general fund CIP. Staff recommendation for tonight: adopt a resolution approving the fiscal year 2019-20 and fiscal year 2020-21 budget and the 25-year capital improvement program. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, your report did not address OPEB and CalPERS liabilities. Is that separate from this is just the CIP, so it doesn't really impact these budgets?
This is both operating and CIP. Staff had presented that in the workshop, and we felt that this is more of a shortened version of that presentation, okay, but it does include OPEB, pension and advance funding and so on.
I'm sorry, I was traveling out of state when that workshop was held. And I'll try to make my comments very general and generic. It strikes me we're coming into a perilous point financially with an inverted yield curve, short while ago, the 20-year was inverted, and it dropped again a little bit today. That leads two issues. One is a window for debt at fairly low interest rates, which may be universal. The second is a potential collapse in our support structure and revenues for OPEB and CalPERS. I would encourage us, and it doesn't have to be part of this approval tonight, to think in some of those strategic terms as, are there areas where we do want to take on debt? And might we even want to take on that debt in a way to protect our needed and identified obligations we're going to have in the retirement legacy cost? You can't do it directly, but there's an indirect process for being able to shift the monies. And that may be wise at this point. 2008 could be repeated. I have not supported many of the major projects in our capital improvement program that are in the near term. I feel that the AMI is still in process technically, and that there's no immediate administrative need for it. Therefore, as with Irvine Ranch and others that are more of a business-oriented approach toward their planning, would hope that we could delay those, and I see no loss to the district. South Bay Aqueduct, major issue for finances in the sense that it's a critical link. DWR is doing now their third study. When asked about it, they do another study. But eventually it's probably going to come to $1 billion retrofit, and if we could tie that to the California water fix, then we'd have a mechanism for having to pay it. We talked briefly earlier this evening about contingency response capabilities, and if there's a way to somehow program the necessary expenses to build up those necessary assets to respond to a contingency event, I would hope that that could be added to the budget at some time. It may not be a capital expenditure, but it's certainly it's that quasi-capital versus and also not mentioned in this is the replacement of our AC pipe. We started this program 10 years ago, and to my understanding, we've made some connections, but we've yet to put a length of replacement AC pipe in the ground. So if that could be identified and programmed, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so the main replacement program, we've done some significant amount of work on that. For example, there was a lot of AC pipe up in the Canyon Heights area, as well as some of the fault crossings, and we are currently designing projects that will replace a significant amount of AC pipe. It's 660 miles of the 900 miles or so of pipe that we are replacing. It is probably the most vulnerable, and the small main replacement program is earmarking a lot of AC pipe to replace. So we're getting on it.
Have we developed a document that shows the progress and what's going to be done in what year or how much per year?
We will be happy to share the plan with the committee or the full board, whatever the board's pleasure is.
Well, thank you. That'd be informative. Thank you.
Okay.
Sydney, great presentation.
Thank you.
I don't know if I would use a word as strongly as Director Weed, perilous, but I might describe it as opportunity that is coming our way, and to keep an eye on the ball here. Both our bank and J.P. Morgan and Morgan Stanley put out reports this week forecasting that the 10-year note might be down as low as 1.25, 1.35 by the end of the year, with 30-year rates, following behind. And if you take a look at the long-term charts, we're getting down to where interest rates were when we did the 2012 February 2012 financing and the 2015 financing. We're actually a little bit below right now from 2012. And we're very close to 2015 with a forecast of even going lower. So I don't recall whether there's opportunity to refinance on those earlier bonds. If we had a difference of 1 percentage point, might be something to take a look at.
Sure.
But yeah, the interest rate environment is very interesting, and everything is presaging a recession. And even there was a report out today on the small cap stocks are severely lagging the rest of the market, which is also a leading indicator of where the general domestic economy is going. So those are some things to keep an eye on. I want to make a couple of comments. I know that we are always conservative in our demand forecast, but I find it a little bit unnerving that since the beginning of the year in the water production report in our board binder, every month we've been below our forecast. And I know we had, May was a heavy rain month, but every month's been below forecast. Yesterday I was at the BOSCA Board Policy Committee meeting, and one of their charts they was presenting was on Hetch Hetchy demand. And 2016 was 25% below 2013. It was the same in 2018, and we are tracking to the same curve right now for the entire Bay Area is using 25% less water from Hetch Hetchy than 2013. And so I know that in the last Finance Committee we were a little bit more than 2% below our fiscal year target for this fiscal year. But going into a recession, you know, there may be weaker water demand overall. People are cutting back. All kinds of things can affect our finances. So I would just say stay on the cautious side, on the conservative side, for the benefit of all of us. I also want to thank the staff. I really appreciate this. I asked at the last budget workshop to provide the board with republication of the coverage we have on our pension liabilities and OPEB, and so I was glad to see that in the board binder. And the reason I wanted to, and I hope we will put this in the board binder every 6 months or something, if I may make that request.
So Director Sethy, our typical schedule with this is when we have an update to provide. So that usually occurs about once a year, once we would have updated data on either our OPEB liabilities or from CalPERS and our pension status.
Yeah, once a year is fine for, if we have that. I can always ask for it on an intermediate basis. But the reason I wanted to have us take another look at the chart here is, and I'll pass it each way, is when we went into the, here, let me look at that again. Yeah, it was, we were almost at 97% pension coverage in 2007, and within 2 years, because of the market valuation on our securities and everything, we were all the way down to about 55%. And this is why I bring up the condition of the markets, because we've been kind of treading water, getting back up to where we are at 71%, but we've never fully recovered back to where we were back in 2007. And if we go into a recession after a long, protracted recovery of 10 years, we could see market valuations go back down, and suddenly we're back at 50% again on our pension coverage. And so that's why I feel very strongly that if we have extra money available at the end of our budget cycle right now, this 2-year budget cycle, that we dedicate it to some kind of prepayment effort on pension liabilities. I think we're doing a fantastic job on OPEB, and I think the entire board, past and present, to go from, the low teens all the way up to about 50% now in roughly 5 fiscal year periods is great. And would like us to continue on that path. But what really concerns me are the pension liabilities, because they're continuing to grow. Oh, you got the right page, okay. And yeah, we could be back down at 50% very quickly if we don't, earnestly really push to try and cover those costs. And let's see. Lastly, I brought up in the budget meeting, and this kind of ties in with what Director Weed was talking about. In the latter years of our forecast period here, I would like to, I don't want to sound ambivalent here, but I think for public purposes it's good to put out this forecast the way it is. I would like to see us, on the other hand, develop some kind of contingency plan or a forward-looking plan, a what-if plan that says, what if we were to, in the latter year periods, double the main replacement program to 20 miles a year or something, or $20 million a year, and how would we finance that? If we're in a low interest rate environment, maybe doing a $100 million bond and trying to see if we can get some exceptions to the covenants in the bond so that we could do it over a 5-year or 6-year period or 7-year period instead of 3 years. That might be something to take a look at, because I'm fearful of that curve, that bell curve that we're running into. And I think we need to look out after future boards. What's the board going to be doing 10 years from now for this district? And you don't want that board facing a sudden, crisis. So maybe that's something we develop on the side.
Sounds like potentially a future finance board workshop.
No. If I could quickly note that we do have some options on financing, one of which is a more conservative trust on the CERBT funds. We have the most aggressive now. Starting to step that down may be prudent. And that on the unfunded liabilities, you do not necessarily have to put the money into the lockbox, but you can certainly set it aside to be able to cover the demands when those lockbox demands start growing. And you can have reserves built up for future liability costs without having to put them out of pocket. Again, a protection, and so we don't have a huge impact on our rates.
I don't have any questions. I was able to get pretty much everything I needed from our workshop, so I appreciate you having a very thorough board workshop for us to go through this information. The one comment that I would make, which I made at the workshop and I've made in our engineering committee meetings, and kind of echoing what previous directors mentioned, is if we have an opportunity to take on a small amount of debt, but use that money to fast track some other projects that we have in the main replacement program in particular, I think that would be something that I in particular would be very supportive of, and I would hope that we can have a future board workshop where we can explore that idea more in depth.
Director Akbari, I'm going to differ with you a little bit here, and I just want to make it absolutely clear to the non-public that's here that it's an enormous task that would be put on this district to do more than we're planning to do right now. So it would require, I really think you need to plan at least 5 years ahead right now. So you just can't go out to the markets and borrow money and then say, oh yeah, we're going to do this XYZ project for main replacement. This is, like the General Manager Bob Shaver said the last meeting, might require getting another facility. It's going to require a lot more hiring and engineering. There's a lot more resources. There's outside consulting firms that have to come on board. It's an enormous task. And that's why I'm saying we need to develop a plan where we're looking out at the latter half of this coming decade. That's what I'm trying to argue for. Because you can't do it tomorrow. Even if we have the right interest rate environment, you can borrow all the money, but can we staff up? When we hire, it's $1 million investment per employee, and so we have to think of the future expenses, and we're just talking about pension liabilities. This has to be really well thought out a few years in advance. That's my thought. So that's where we differ. But the long-term goal is the same.
Actually, I would say maybe we don't differ. Maybe I think what we did discuss at the last workshop was essentially what you summarized here, and kind of where I'm coming at it from as well. That if we set up a future board workshop where we can kind of flesh out this plan on what opportunities we have to ramp up the program, whether it be 5 years from now or at least having that plan in place, so when we have the opportunity to take on a little bit of debt or to add to our staff, we already know, okay, how are we going to allocate those resources? And so that I don't think that there's a whole lot of distance in how we're approaching this idea.
We're listening from the staff perspective.
I'll chime in a little bit. I agree, and I think I'm glad we're looking that direction. One thing, I was just sitting here hearing about the program. We're not really kind of getting into that program a little bit and discussing it, but I think that's okay. Budget is one thing that I was just remembering driving down Mission Boulevard the other day heading towards 680 and the monumental traffic problems we have, not just in Fremont, but Union City, Newark, and one of our pipes in our program is going to be involving traffic impacts. And I think that's another thing we will definitely need to address with the cities, in that stand by, we have issues. Well, we don't have issues. We're trying to prevent having issues, because if we don't do it, the impact will be far more severe. But one only has to look at that one break in Union City, and that evening's traffic. It showed just a massive issue when you took out one road. The impact in that entire area of Union City was like an hour or more to get through what would normally take you 10 minutes. So I think it's a great idea. I'm 100% behind it. And I think we also need to kind of give the cities a heads up. But also with that is why we're doing it. That by doing this, before they break, we're really saving them when they break. Because if we don't do it, they will break.
I wonder if we might bring it up when you have your next meeting with USD, and we have a USD workshop. This might be an item to put on there, because there may be parallel work with USD where we get it done all at the same time in the best interest of our three cities.
Oh, yes, and in a perfect world, you combine the underground infrastructure like ACWD, USD, with transportation improvements when the cities are doing their streets anyway, because I think if the economy stays the way it is, there's going to have to be some transportation improvements eventually in this area, or it won't be able to function. So I think we'll be looking out for opportunities. So if a street gets widened or a street's going to get rebuilt or whatever, that we can take advantage of that time and do a main replacement for two reasons. One, it's a lot less expensive if the city's doing traffic control anyway. And two, you hate to run into those situations where the street is redone and then a year later it gets ripped up by a water utility or by a sewer agency. So I think these issues are germane, and we need to look at them closely.
I'd like to throw in one last comment on the presentation here, because it stands out, what our debt ratio is, and it's pretty high. And it's from, I think, 10 years ago, it's gone progressively up from close to 2, now up to 6, 7, right? And so people might ask, isn't it inordinately high? And so I have to be able to answer that question to members of the public. Are you charging too much in your water rates, that it's gone so absurdly high?
Little Hoover Commission.
Right. So I look at main replacement as primarily covered on a continuing basis from our ratepayers and not borrowing money. So I want to make that clear too, that the reason we are opening up this much higher debt ratio, or debt reserve ratio, if we can call it that, is to finance the really big projects down the road. That's what we need to keep our eyes on, because those are going to be really expensive. And so we have to have that borrowing capacity when those big projects come up. What are we going to do with Los Vaqueros, South Bay Aqueduct, potentially water purification plant? Those are going to require big bucks, and that's going to use up most of that debt reserve capacity that we have.
Well, for a comment on, if I might, first of all, the financial picture is so much better today than it's been in some of my past 25 years here. And we're not worrying about major rate increases or financial crises. There are areas we can certainly improve. But we have a 2-year budget. Once we digest these projects that we have in the near term that have nothing to do with providing a quality water supply, but they're driven by environmental legislation, so whether it be recycled water or fish that are surplus to our fundamental mission and function. But we're buying them into them, and we're digesting them at an extraordinary cost. So hopefully we'll get there. There are some areas of technologies on the main replacement program with the lining of pipes, and there's been some significant advancements there. And it may well be we'll come up with some alternative technology, and we've done it in a few locations, that the cost could be cut dramatically, and as that technology unfolds. That same technology would also save us a lot of money on AMI. But that being the case, because we're going to have to redo it in a few years anyway, as the technology advances. So there are some things we could take a look at and where our priorities are. But overall, the financial picture of the district is much sounder than it was in even recent years. Thank you.
Further comments? Okay, we do have a staff recommendation to adopt the fiscal year 2019-2020 and the FY 2021 budget. 25-year capital improvement plan. Do we have a motion?
This Finance Committee member moves the staff recommendation.
We have a we have a motion.
You're
We
the
have a
chair.
second?
I'll second it,
We have a second.
with caveats as previously expressed.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Secretary, call the roll, please.
Sure. Directors Huang, Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. Moving on, we were into
Board committee
board
reports.
committee reports, correct.
Staff stands by and available to respond to any questions on any committee report.
Should review those.
None from me.
So operational
Okay,
reports, if
operational
you'd like.
reports.
Again, we had nothing to present specifically today, but we're happy to respond to any questions.
Want to point out the harness report again? Nicely done.
I haven't reviewed
Oh.
it, that's all.
I do have one quick question. Do we, we've been talking a little bit about demand,
Later?
couple days.
Yeah, we have some information.
Yes, we do. Demands have been up the last couple days. It's been 47 yesterday, or excuse me, 48 yesterday and 47 million gallons the prior day.
So Mr. Wunderlich also watches these demands closely and indicated that if demands stay roughly at this level through July and August, then basically demands will match what we forecast in the budget.
Right, to hit 34 MGD of sales over the course of the year, we need to be in the high 40s in the summer months.
Oh.
Thank you.
Now we're in the low 40s.
47, 48, the last
So
couple days.
we do have a brief staff presentation on item 6.3, if we may.
On to item 6.3, please.
So 6.3.1, Mr. Wunderlich has performed some analysis and some research and kind of came up with some interesting results in response to board requests for some financial benchmark metrics, and he'd like to share that information with the board this evening.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shaver. Back in March, staff took some benchmark metrics to the Finance Committee and had some good discussion with the committee, and then took a draft presentation back to the committee in April, and so I'm pleased to be able to present this to the full board this evening. So the purpose of this presentation is really just to explain how we're doing compared to other Bay Area water providers on our financial and efficiency metrics. And the real genesis of this came out of the strategic planning effort, which identifies benchmarking as one of the core initiatives aligning with strategic plan goals 3.2 and 3.3 related to ensuring cost reasonableness and promoting transparency. And so what we're hoping to learn through this process is, are we doing a good job? Can we feel that we're reasonably efficient given the landscape we work within? Or is there going to be something that kind of sticks out from this where we feel like we need to look at it more deeply? And so we're going to go through the metrics, the comparisons, and then some conclusions. And just in brief, benchmarking is checking or evaluating our performance against a standard. And the median result on the different metrics is what we're considering for the selected Bay Area water providers is really what we're using as the standard. So if we're above the median, then maybe it's time to pause and think about it a little bit. If we're below the median, then that suggests we're operating pretty efficiently in that regard. The Bay Area water providers we've used as comparison include Contra Costa Water District, Dublin San Ramon Services District, East Bay Mud, Marin Municipal, SFPUC, and then we thought it would be valuable to also add in a private water company, and so we've included San Jose Water Company. And so each of these water providers is consistently identified by the same letter throughout the charts later on in the presentation, but I am not going to tell you which agency corresponds to which letter. And the dark blue line, horizontal line on each chart represents the median.
We figured it out.
Well, to that point, Director Sethy, the metrics were developed for which data is readily available. It's all taken from each agency's 17-18 financial report, or in the case of San Jose Water Company, they report on a calendar year basis, so for them it's their 2018 report. And so this is all audited data. It's all data that will be available in this format in future years, which means we can replicate what's being presented this evening each year into the future and get a sense of how things trend moving forward. But just to point out, we did not distribute any surveys. So this is what we could glean directly from audited financial statements that are publicly available. As you can imagine with something like this, there's also a certain amount of judgment that goes in to some of these evaluations. So if someone from, say, Contra Costa Water District were to undertake the same effort, it could be reasonable for their results to look slightly differently. So the metrics we developed fall into three broad categories: operational efficiency, financial capacity, and then rate impact. You know, what does all of this mean to our customers? And when we get to the very conclusion, we'll come back to some of the comments that were made by Director Sethy about our debt coverage and what it means for our customers. There are a couple of, most of these metrics, they just kind of mean what they say, but there are a couple of them I'd like to discuss in more detail. I think require a little more context to understand what they're about. The first one is cost of water, and that's represented in dollars per million gallons produced. It's based on total cash payments during the fiscal year. And so, but what we've done to make sure we're not double counting on capital costs is any capital cost financed by debt is not excluded, or excuse me, is not included in these comparisons provided this evening. But what is included is an agency's debt service payments, because we felt it would be double counting to include both of those things. And what you see is a number of agencies have a general strategy of financing their capital programs through debt. And then the other thing that I want to point out about a cost of water comparison is sometimes you'll see an agency that has very low rates, but they have significant property tax or development fee revenues. And so even though their typical household bill is low, their financial footprint on the community can still be reasonably high. And so by looking at the cost of water, you neutralize those different approaches to securing your revenue. And then the monthly bill is, per our typical approach, based on 800 cubic feet of consumption per month, which is typical for our residential customers. It's also based on an agency's bill as of June 30th of 2018. And so most of these agencies that we compared against actually implemented a rate increase on the day after we did our comparison. So our schedule of rate increases is in March of each year, while most align with the fiscal year and implement rate increases July 1. So with that, I'll begin running through the slides. The first is cost of water. You can see most of the agencies are pretty similar. We are actually the median agency on cost of water, and you can see it costs just a little over $8,000 to produce 1 million gallons. The next one is connections per employee. In this one, we're one of the more efficient agencies above the median bar. We're just a little under 400 connections per agency employee. Next is operating revenue per employee. Again, we are the median agency on this measure. And then the last operational efficiency metric is our operating cost per connection. And so we're at about a little under $1,200 in annual operating cost per connection, which puts us just a little bit below the median level. So moving on to our financial capacity metrics, the first one is debt coverage ratio. As we can see that we're not just above the median, we are the highest of the surveyed agencies in debt coverage. Our next one is our pension and OPEB liability as a function of payroll. In this one, being above the median means that you have a higher debt level, right? So typically you would want to be below the median on this measure. And so although we are above the median, the second highest of the surveyed agencies, the one thing we really do have going for us on this metric is that we have a plan that's already in our long-term forecast to address this by June 30 of 2032.
I can make a quick comment. A purely editorial comment. Is that unfunded liability?
Yes, so that's unfunded liability, yes. Yes.
And then the other, Moody, it was interesting. Moody's, which used this ratio in a stress test for pension liabilities in some papers a few years ago. And I kept referring to that. And then we recently had a Moody's evaluation where they came in and increased our bond rating, our credit rating. It was interesting that they used different terminology and different criteria. So we came out well, but it would be, but as I recall, Moody's was looking at payroll and benefits at one time, and rather than just W-2s, they had different levels of categorization. So apparently there's no real, and they were the only ones that looked at pension liabilities of the three, which is Fitch and S&P. So they looked at it, but they clearly had modified their process dramatically. It's interesting.
Yeah, our recent surveillance process with Moody's, they did ask for our latest actuarial valuations for pension and OPEB liability, so they did take a look at it, but they look at a wide range of factors, and in total, and looking at all of the factors, they were impressed with our overall financial performance.
Yeah, no, we did well. In an earlier publication, they said 20% of the rating would have been based on this ratio, and the ratio was, as they then measured it, would have been significantly more to our detriment. But that's great. Thank you.
So as staff, we looked at this ratio as well as our debt coverage and thought, well, okay, there are different types of debt agencies can have, but the bottom line is any type of debt creates a burden that you have to deal with. And so we wanted to get a picture of overall debt burden for an agency, and so what we also looked at was the total liabilities of an agency as reported in their financial report divided by your annual operating revenue. And so actually what we ended up seeing here is that there tends to be more of a correlation on this debt burden with agencies who approach their capital program on a debt financing basis. And so your pension and OPEB liabilities tend to be relatively modest relative to your long-term debt that would be created from debt financing capital programs. And so on this measure where your OPEB and pension is combined with your long-term bonds, we actually compare pretty favorably to the median with a pretty low overall debt burden. Then the last couple of metrics we looked at were the customer impacts. We are just a few dollars above the median on our typical monthly bill, but still relatively close to most of the pack, which ranges between $50 to $60 per month. And then the last one we looked at was the recent rate increase to get a sense of how agencies are trending. And in this case, the 5% increase we implemented during the 17-18 fiscal year was just a touch below the median.
Excuse me, your bill chart, that included both fixed and variable cost?
Yes, it would be the total amount a customer pays for 8
bill.
units of consumption.
Okay, thank you.
And so after looking at this, we came to a few conclusions. First and foremost is we would strongly recommend against comparing against a specific agency. There are just too many different unique operational considerations, such as if you purchase your water from a wholesaler versus if you have your own source of supply. You can imagine, for example, on the employee counts, if you purchase all of your water from a wholesaler, you don't need staff to operate a treatment plant, as an example. There are also governance differences, and then one of the things unique for us is our groundwater management responsibilities that most other water districts don't take on. But while we wouldn't recommend comparing ourselves against a specific other agency, we do think comparing against the median is reasonable. And so if you find that you're consistently performing either well or poorly against the median, then that's really worth considering what those underlying factors might be. The good news story for us, though, is that we felt that for the most part on our financial and operational metrics, we did compare pretty favorably, while the rate impact metrics were pretty similar to the medians. And so what does all of this mean? Based on all of our financial capacity, some of which has been discussed this evening, we feel that we're well positioned to be able to issue debt to finance capital projects in the future. We have a lot of excess debt capacity. And because we don't have the same level of debt burdens that a number of other agencies have, we feel that we're well positioned to maintain our rate increases at or below the median in the future. And then the last kind of item or recommendation is that we continue repeating this each year and report it in conjunction with the budget. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
I don't have any questions, but I have some comments. The first is, I'm so very grateful to the staff for preparing these benchmarks. Well before you arrived at the district, I'd been hammering away that we needed to, on some consistent basis, come up with reasonable benchmarking. And we've done some periodically, but I think you've really distilled it down to where on a repetitive basis we can go back and do the same exercise and then compare and come up with some trends too over time. On the districts that were selected, this is just something to think about for the future, because as you know, I like to read CAFRs. And there are some water districts where I go back and check what they're doing, just because I see something that they're doing well. So Fair Oaks Water District is one. They're about the 10th the size we are, but they're really well managed and they have zero debt. They've paid off all their debts outside of the pension liabilities. And Cucamonga Valley Water District is roughly the same size we are, so they don't have the same rate structure, but there's a lot of comparables there that I like to look at between CAFRs. Irvine Ranch Water District is another one, because they're a superior run agency. There's some other districts down in Southern California that are good to look at, Orange County and stuff like that. So I would try to pull in some out-of-region water districts as well. Maybe a select few, just 4, that you feel, you know, maybe are worth taking a look at. And other than that, I am just so pleased about this, and I think it's hard to convey these results to the public. I'm not sure how to do it properly without naming names. But what I would encourage you to do, and I mentioned this at our committee meeting, is I think this would make a really nice presentation at Aqua, because there are just so few people doing things like this. And I think it would be educational and healthy for the entire industry to see that how we're looking at things. And I think it will be a real eye-opener to a lot of people.
And we're looking into that.
I would note that AWWA puts out a publication which looks at national standards. And what's interesting about the national standards are that our cost of operations, I think, are probably above those of the rest of the nation. And the number of personnel might be higher. But that may be more of a reflection on the regulatory requirements and environment that we're working on in California and the San Francisco Bay Area, as opposed to other more generic issues. So, at one time I debated whether we should be looking at the national standards. I'm coming to believe that the local standards are the better measure, because we live in a bubble, both for our wages, salaries, and cost of living, as well as some of the regulations and to be honest, regulatory nonsense we deal with coming out of Sacramento. Thank you.
So, Director Weed, I would say that's why we really focused on other Bay Area water providers, because we felt like they were going to be operating in as close to the same conditions as we do as possible, both in terms of water supply situation, constraints, requirements, as well as the labor market they're in.
And we stopped participating in the AWWA survey, largely because there are hardly any California agencies that do now. So it's really hard to determine how you're doing. And I mean, one of the other issues is it's just a fact of life here. Most parts of the country, you can stick a well in the ground and pump water and you're just doing fine. But, you know, we're importing water from hundreds of miles away, so that just the cost of infrastructure, because basically we're in a semi-desert, is different than what most of the country experiences.
I'd like to mention two other points that come to mind right now. One is, I have always found it frustrating that I cannot look at the financials for Zone 7 and make any sense out of them. Because they're using arcane accounting from like 50, 60 years ago, and it's all from the county. They haven't developed their own in-house financial system, and so they abide by the county, the way they organize and format things. But I was recently informed at a meeting at the Delta Conveyance Finance Authority by Valerie Pryor, General Manager, that they are going to a format like ACWD and other districts. So that's something to look forward to. And then number two, periodically, maybe once every 2 years or so, I've gone to the Standard & Poor's website and then Moody's, and you can look up on their benchmarking metrics, you know, where we place. And it might be helpful at some point to kind of pick and choose some of that data and put it into some tables for us. Or maybe just throwing it out as food for thought.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something we can look into.
No questions or comments tonight.
Okay.
Very nice. Thank you.
All right.
On to General Manager's report.
Yes, we have 3 items on the agenda, plus 2 other brief items that I'd like to inform the board about. I'm sure the board recalls that at the April 25th board workshop, what was discussed as the next step in the clean energy program would involve contracting with a consultant to develop the scope of work and terms for perhaps Michael D. Brown and or other solar vendors to propose and to assist with the procurement and negotiation processes for the vendors that would actually be installing the solar systems. We heard loud and clear from the board that if it makes sense, we should expedite the process. but we also want to make sure that the district gets the best value from the services, considering all factors. So Ms. Rotter just has a really brief, very general update, just because the board was interested in expediting this. If you have any brief questions, we can respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. So proposals were received on June 3rd, and staff is currently checking references and preparing to conduct interviews with the highest scoring consultants. Staff expects to bring a recommendation to award the next phase of consulting services to the board at the July board meeting.
So we're moving forward. It is not necessarily going to be Michael D. Brown, though, just for your information.
May I note that but for the subsidies given to private enterprise and a private partnership, agreement, public-private partnership, this would make no sense. And those subsidies drop as of the end of this year in December, so there is certainly a reason to expedite.
Correct. The second item involves the Help on Tap program, and Mr. Wunderlich will give a brief update, plus I think a heartwarming story that you might like to hear.
Right, so we recently crossed the 2-year threshold since inception of the Help on Tap program. When customers are found eligible for the program, that lasts for 2 years, so we're now beginning our initial wave of re-enrollments in the program. And so I just wanted to give a brief update on that. Staff has programmed so that we automatically send out renewal reminders with a copy of an application to anybody who's within a month of lapsing on the program. And so we've sent out about 500 renewal reminders the past couple of months, and so far over 300 have been returned. Customers who submit these renewal applications will remain on the program pending the review, so we won't automatically disenroll somebody while we're going through that process. And as of earlier this week, we have 897 customers enrolled in the program. I'd also like to recognize Ethan Birch, our Help on Tap program manager, as well as all of our customer service staff who are really invested in this program and do everything they can to help these customers get enrolled. I know they really, I think, find a lot of value in being able to provide this support to our customers, which is why they really appreciated this recent experience that I want to share. One of the customers who received one of these renewal applications actually called in and spoke with us, and basically what they expressed was that they no longer qualify for the program. They had recently found new work and their income exceeded the thresholds, so they were asking to be removed from the program, but expressing their real heartfelt gratitude that the district had a program to support them while they were experiencing financial difficulties. And it really meant a lot to that customer, and I know it meant a lot to our team in the customer service division that a customer would call up and express those sentiments, and I think really helps us all feel a lot of value out of running a program like this.
So, thank you. And you have another item regarding a different kind of recognition.
Yes. I'm pleased to be able to report that we recently received formal notification that the district has achieved the Government Finance Officers Association Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for the 20th year in a row.
Yay.
And so this is really a great accomplishment for the district, and in particular, I would like to recognize Mariana Grajeda, our accounting manager, who was the lead on preparing last year's comprehensive financial report, as well as the entire accounting division, as well as staff throughout the district that supported the effort. To be awarded, or to be eligible for this award, you do have to check a few boxes. The first is you have to prepare a comprehensive annual financial report as to just a financial statement. And so that means you include, in addition to the basic financial statements and notes, also an introductory section and a statistical section that provides more data and context about the operations of the agency. It's considered much more transparent to take this approach, as it helps the reader really learn a lot more about your district or your agency. The second thing you need to do is your financial report must include all funds and all component units of the government agency. That's not such a big deal for us as a special water district, but for a city or a county or a multi-purpose district, they may not always do that in their financial reports. The CAFR must also be independently audited, and the auditor must find that the financial statements are a fair presentation of the agency's finances. And then lastly, any comments made in the prior year by the auditor must be addressed by the agency in writing. And so we check off all of these boxes, and so I'm pleased to be able to report that for 20 years in a row, we've achieved this designation, and we look forward to going for year 21.
Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich. Congratulations.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be applying for the budget award also, right?
We will not be applying for the budget award this year.
Uh-huh.
There are a number of requirements that we don't meet yet, and given the recent transition in staffing from Mr. Chen to Mr. Alm as our supervising financial analyst, what we're targeting is the next 2-year budget to meet all of those requirements, and so we're hoping to get partway there in the mid-cycle update and then all the way there for the next 2-year budget.
I see. Great.
Okay. If there's no other questions for Mr. Wunderlich, I have 2 other quick items. It came up in discussion at the board meeting earlier, but I just wanted to point out some statistics regarding the Camp Fire that are just hard to fathom about the size of that fire. There were 85 civilian fatalities with 2 missing. The area of destruction is almost 240 square miles. It destroyed almost 19,000 structures, and the total estimated damage is about $16.5 billion, capital B. So one of the agencies most impacted by the Camp Fire was the Paradise Irrigation District, which is a special district and retailer who provides potable water to the town of Paradise, and they recently asked for mutual assistance via the California Water Wastewater Agency Response Network, or CalWARN. The mutual assistance requests were for resources to assisting with repairing their distribution system so that it can provide potable water again, because the remaining structures do not have water service for the most part. One of the resources they asked for was for a utility worker who can help switch out meters, flush lines, and install manifolds so that samples can be collected. And this is an issue because of the extreme heat of the fire. Some of the plastic has been melted, essentially, and they have VOCs in their water, and it needs to be cleared to make the water potable. So they also asked potentially for lab technicians to collect samples, but they don't need those people yet. So ACWD was requested to assist, and we will be doing so. They're looking for 1 or 2 people, and so we can definitely provide 1 and maybe a second the following week. And it's competitive. The manager in the district's distribution maintenance division asked for volunteers, and there were 5 volunteers to go up there for a week. And Adam Huardo, who is a utility worker, will be deployed from Sunday, June 16th to Friday, June 19th to support PID's efforts. The way this works is usually by seniority when it comes to union positions. But there are 4 other folks that are willing to go too. It's a little challenging because the utility workers are extremely busy now with all the development going on, but we'll be doing that. And we may provide a laboratory person at some point. And it also takes other staff members to equip a vehicle, to get the issues of logistics, of housing, and all those things sorted out. So it takes more than 1 person to send 1 person. Anyway, PID, their leadership has expressed gratitude. I'm aware of only 1 other agency that's providing support right now. from this latest request, and we look forward to hearing Adam's report, and just thought the board would want to be aware of that. The second issue and last, well, actually with two more quick things, my apologies. Once again, City of Fremont will be conducting its 4th of July parade. Director Weed indicated that he was interested in going. I was wondering if any of the other directors will be participating this year. Okay, Director Akbari, Gunther. I've decided I will give Shireen the day off, so I will be participating as well this year with Corinne. Just so that you know, we'll be sending information to you on all the logistics, but appreciate your support.
I'll probably be there too.
Okay, so it looks like we may have at least 4 directors, possibly an entire board. That would be great. Lastly, this is late-breaking information. It actually occurred during the meeting, so that's why it's nice to have communication ability sometimes. Laura Heides will be providing a quick update on recent news coming out from the state and why it might matter to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. Just a quick note that it looked like this afternoon on both the DWR and California Department of Natural Resources websites, they put up some new information. One of those things on the Natural Resources website is that they have set up a new portion of the website related to the Governor's Water Resilience Portfolio Initiative that was announced also at Aqua. So we will be keeping up with what that entails. Sounds like they're going to have some listening sessions later this summer related to that initiative. And then also at the same time this afternoon, it looks like DWR has posted a blog about their next steps related to Delta conveyance. So they've noted that they're going to be proceeding with some new environmental review for a 1-tunnel project per the Governor's executive order. So I'll go ahead and send out a couple of links after the meeting tonight. The websites have been a little bit sketchy, sometimes working, sometimes not, but you can take a look, and there may be some stuff in the media about this in the coming days.
And there will be opportunities at various venues such as the Water Commission, Natural Resources Agency, Cal EPA, State Board, and others, where they will be seeking input on this climate resilient water strategy that the governor is spearheading. So with that concludes general manager reports, and we're up to item 7. President Gunther?
I would like to comment on sending that employee up there to Paradise. I think that's very good. That we discussed earlier, we may be requesting that in the future. And when our employees go to things like that, when they went after Liberty several years ago now, the experience you just can't get here. So thanks for taking care of that.
Agreed. And the fact that it's competitive, that we have employees that really want to help, I think, first of all, it instills a certain level of pride in me, and I believe the agency, that we have the resources and we assist when we can.
We'll move on to the director comments and reports. I would like to say, due to my job commitments, I was not able to attend the Aqua Conference this year, and I was very disappointed I didn't. I've always supported the Aqua Conference. This year I got to support railroad interests during that week. It was okay. I don't regret going to where I did. However, I would love to have gone to the conference too. I think we learned an incredible amount of information there by attending these. So I bid on to you. What wonders did we learn? Was it depressing like some have been?
I never saw the sun in 3 days down there.
No.
It was a regular Monterey summer.
Okay, well, start here. I know I also attended the JPIA, which begins on the 6th of May, and then carried through, but had to leave on the evening of the 8th, so missed the 9th and 10th. You note a difference in context and tenure based on the fact that the one tunnel project had been declared about that time. And there was some speculation. Of the issues involved, I thought it was more sort of processing along the as previously identified. There was a significant change in the Delta Conveyance project, of course, that came about, but and that was a step down, not a loss of the project as a whole. The JPIA is progressing with the insurance company. That would be a captive insurance company, and they're still strong. We're now a member of all 4 insurance programs with the JPIA, and that has taken effect, I believe, following that meeting. The next, I would note, though, I also attend the BOSCA meetings, and I think there's something worth commenting on as a board member. BOSCA is going through a curious change where they had, when I was first going on the board in 2003, you'd raise issues about water supply and the need for independent water supply, and the response was, well, San Francisco's promised us a level of service of no outage of more than 24 hours, and therefore did not want to look at contingency planning or alternate water sources. That has changed, primarily on the argument of unimpaired flows in the San Joaquin. And maybe in part by, I would suggest that BOSCA is looking for greater credibility and as an entity. But they're spending significant sums of money in litigation on the unimpaired flows, the hiring Hanson Bridget, and running up a total legal cost this year greater than that of ACWD with Hanson Bridget of over about $800,000. They're also spending about $500,000 projected on looking at Los Vaqueros, with an estimated cost that was noted earlier of almost $2,600 an acre foot, delivered untreated water, that water still had to be treated. An extraordinary cost. And they're going off on other tangents. If you look at the picture and the needs, they really don't impact Alameda County. We have a groundwater reservoir, the Niles Cone, as does Hayward. Santa Clara County has the Santa Clara Valley Water District, which has a wholesale responsibility for the entire county, although they're full on implementation. The real challenge is San Mateo County. And San Mateo County has a different culture. They have used water, lack of water availability as a reason for denying major developments, such as the Redwood Shores in Redwood City, 12,000 units. When you make suggestions that and when you look at some of the issues that they have, similar to ones we have, the reliability of the South Bay Aqueduct becomes as big a problem to them as acquiring the additional water sources. So there's a bigger program going out there. BOSCA is spending a lot of money. They've hired an additional staff person for something that we might not need. It is a interesting tap. The irony is that the simple solution for the San Mateo County is to desalinate the San Francisco Bay. But that's a political issue, a line they don't want to cross, because that would provide water that would promote development in San Mateo County, where the people don't want water. We live in a curious world. Thank you.
Before I go into my report, I'll mention that Director Weed and I spent 3 days when we went up to Oroville Dam, October of 2017, and we're exploring around. We spent half a day in Paradise and went to the Gold Rush Museum, which was one of the finest I have ever seen in California. And we had 2 docents there, a gentleman and a lady, that gave us the history of the whole area and gold mining and stuff, and unfortunately I found out later on that the gentleman did die in the fire. We did pass PID, Paradise Irrigation District. They had really nice offices, small, but in a very nice wooded area. And before going up there, I looked up all their water sources. And, you know, they had all these beautiful lakes and everything around there, and for recreation as well as water supply. Yeah, so it's very sad what's going on up there. Okay, let me start with Aqua. I'll try to make it brief. Day one, I took care of my Aqua responsibilities for the local government committee and the water management committee meetings. Day two, I put my focus at Aqua on, since we're working on the clean energy programs here at the district. Anything that was clean energy related, I went to. So the energy committee meeting, which I'm not a member of, the energy committee program, which was a really thorough presentation, and I believe Mr. Stevenson was part of that program with me. Director Huang and I were at the solar PPA one, and then I was on some other clean energy things. All in all, I thought it added real value to what I can bring to the table as a board member when we are talking about the things we are under our clean energy program initiative. Day three, I found the most interesting program was in the afternoon on the voluntary agreements, a way out of the Delta dilemma. I thought that was just really insightful, especially with Mr. Crowfoot and Blumenthal, you know, providing their thoughts there. So, I'll just say that all in all, that was a pretty good conference. I also, on behalf of the board, I think I was representing President Gunther, I participated in the ACWD Contra Costa Water District joint meeting that we normally have at Aqua. Thought that was a good meeting. And then I also represented the board at the SBA Contractors joint meeting between ACWD, Santa Clara, and Zone 7. And I found that meeting really interesting as far as all the politics that everybody is thinking about on all of these different issues that we're dealing with. Don't normally hear that depth of conversation, but with all of the general managers there and board members, you hear a different level of discussion. So I was more of a listener, as you could have seen at that meeting, but it was educational. I would encourage us to do everything we can, and I know we are, on looking at all the needs of the South Bay Aqueduct and trying to cost out things so we are prepared to spend money on that. On the 16th, making a little transition here, of May, I was at the Delta Conveyance Finance Authority meeting in Sacramento, and we appointed an auditor, had some minor things on the program, and then spent most of the meeting in a private session, which I cannot discuss here. I did invite the executive director to talk with our general manager about everything that was discussed in that closed-door session, because it also is dealing with a lot of legal issues, heavy politics.
And
state level.
thank you for that. We had about a 45-minute conversation, and it was very informative. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I have a few other things I want to add in here, not on the agenda. I attended the Bosca Board Policy Committee meeting yesterday while I was on the other side of the bay, and I wanted to attend for one particular reason. They had an agenda item which was on a proposal to join in on a smart controller program, and Ms. Lidas might be interested in this. I think that this is a very interesting new initiative on their part for a Bay Area-wide program to promote smart controllers in all the water districts. This would be supplemental to an AMI system. And so I actually have gone out and studied all of the various smart controllers on the market, gone through the data sheets, and they put out a bid, and they're working with the Sacramento Water Regional Authority as well. And they selected Rachio, which is a Denver-based startup company. They just got their second round of $10 million venture capital financing. They've got some really hot products, and I would say they selected the leading vendor out there. And I'm hoping at the Water Resources Committee, Conservation, we can have a discussion about this. It may not be appropriate this month, but they're trying to finalize the program elements and recommended financing and things like that. But I'm really excited about this as an opportunity, and I'm going to provide some ideas, out-of-the-box ideas, when this does come up for discussion. Also at the BOSCA meeting, it was outside of the scope of the agenda, but they did end up having a discussion about the 10-year CIP for SFPUC, and there were questions asked about what's going into it, how much it's going to cost, and the repairs to Moccasin Dam, whether they want to put a new spillway in, all of the repairs throughout the system, including Mountain Tunnel, and you can already see another $5 billion of costs, and of course we're 4% of that, so you can start to outlook, including paying the debt on that, $250 to $500 million, you know, by the time you get things paid off. That's the amount that we will have to pay. I mean, those are daunting numbers when you start to think of $250 to $500 million and what that means to our ratepayers. So something to keep an eye on. And they are expecting to have that CIP out as a public document later this summer or early fall.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to pass some photos here from San Francisco. It's a set of two of Calaveras Dam. You might recall earlier in the winter, early spring, I reported they only had about 35% of the reservoir full because the Department of Dam and Safety wanted to monitor the new dam, but now it's full. And these pictures, especially when you see them in color, it's very fulfilling. You know, when you think back 10 years ago to starting on the project. Last item, I want to thank the person who fixed all the lettering and made it all shiny out front. Alameda County Water District. It looks really nice. I drove by the other night and it stood out. It's sparkling. So I don't know who did it, but you know, I brought it up in a committee.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly who the personnel was that did it, but I do know it was the Facilities Maintenance Division, so I will make sure that they receive the compliment.
Looks good. That's my report.
All right. Well, I have a couple reports myself, and I will try to keep them pretty pretty brief. So the first one was I was able to attend the Aqua conference. I was there from Tuesday through Friday. I'm forgetting the exact dates that corresponds with. I primarily wanted to use it as an opportunity for me to learn about the changes that were coming to Delta Conveyance. Coming into it pretty new, I thought this conference was a good opportunity for me to attend as many sessions related to conveyance as possible. More from an educational standpoint. And I happened to leave most of my notes at home, but I did make one note on a separate topic that I wanted to bring back. I had the opportunity to attend a session on Wednesday in the afternoon on how to develop the next generation of water system operators. And that evening I chatted with Laura Heides as well on kind of what came from that conversation, and they primarily focused on one regional organization called BACWI, and I am forgetting off the top of my head what that stood for. It was something like Bay Area, something waste and water.
BACWA.
BACWA. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so I wanted to find out from our end if we were partners with that organization, primarily because what they mentioned is that they go to community colleges and veterans groups and get them interested on going into the water and wastewater industries. And based on their reports, they said that 70% of Bay Area water and wastewater agencies have at least one alum of the BACWI program. And so it sounds like they have a really great track record there, and so I'd be interested to learn more about who ACWD has, if anyone, from that program, and what benefits they found from that, and look into how we could kind of expand our partnership.
Sure. I think what you're mentioning, Director Akbari, is BACWWE. I thought it was BACWA.
Yeah, that's...
But it's the Bay Area Consortium for Water and Wastewater Education.
Right.
And as you know, we're partners with Baywork.
Right.
And so, do we have anything to report about these guys?
Yes, Director. One of our most recent water treatment plant operator trainee, who was just promoted to water treatment plant operator, Sidney Monshine, he went through the BACWA classes.
Okay, wonderful. Well,
the BACWA classes.
Okay. I'd love to learn more about
Sure.
his experience from that.
But apparently, it's already a conduit for at least one of our employees to go through this, so we must be tied in.
Right.
Somehow, and
actually they did mention that ACWD and USD both had a lot from the program, which is what perked my ears in particular.
Okay. Thank you.
And the other one that isn't listed here is I had an opportunity to go on the Bay Delta water tour last week, and again, kind of bringing myself up to speed on Delta Conveyance and kind of the recent changes to the project. They told us right as we sat down in the bus that it would be like drinking from a fire hose, and they really weren't kidding. This was probably one of the most fascinating field trips I've ever been on. But we started out in Sacramento, made our way down to Stockton, Concord, San Francisco, and then back to Sacramento. So we got an entire tour of so many facilities, and yeah, I am still trying to get through all of my notes from the tour, but I thought it was a really great opportunity to see. For me, I think the biggest thing was subsidence is kind of just a word or a concept, but until you actually are driving down the levees and you see the disparity, that really kind of opens your eyes on the huge problems that you could have if there's any kind of levee failure. And so, and that was just kind of day one. But like I said, I think it was a good educational opportunity for myself, and so I definitely appreciated having the opportunity to go there.
Further comments?
I just have one. I forgot something here. I passed on a email to Mr. Shaver and President Gunther earlier today on Hayward's AMI program. And so that I don't engage in a three-way conversation, I want to make sure that the email is out to the full board.
I will share that information
Can
as
I-
an informational item to the full board.
I have a
But
hard
think-
copy here,
That's fine.
so I just want to pass it along to
Yeah, that's fine.
And it's just the status on some information I gathered about Hayward's program. That's it. You have a copy for...
So it's just information.
Informational, that's it. No comments.
Okay?
Okay, now further comments. I would like to make one statement in regards that we've had Bosca's mentioned several times this evening. There was a period of time where we didn't even have Bosca, so I guess the glass is half full, maybe more than half full, so.
We had a user organization, BAWA, where the employees were actually employees of our district technically, performing many of the same functions. The question is, does the additional cost and provide an additional benefit, relate to the additional benefit?
Anyway, moving on, we do have a closed session, at this point we can close into closed session with legal counsel, read it out.
Sure, that'd be great. It's now 8:32 and the board is going to convene in closed session pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated representatives, Board President Gunther and Vice President Huang, unrepresented employee, the General Manager. We can now convene into closed session.
Got a closed session, all four of us are here. I'd like to ask the legal counsel to read out the closed session issue.
Great. Thank you, Mr. President. The board convened in closed session pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated representatives, Board President Gunther and Vice President Huang, unrepresented employee, General Manager. And in the closed session, the board conferred with its labor negotiators and no action was taken. So we can now move on to the open session item, which is item 9.1, consideration of resolution approving an amendment to employment agreement with General Manager. And Mr. President, I'd be happy to lead the discussion on this.
I'd like the legal counsel, I'd appreciate that if the legal counsel would read it out.
Great. So there is a proposed resolution approving the Third Amendment to the employment agreement between the district and Robert Shaver and the Third Amendment, and those documents are available in the room right now. I'm giving those to the district secretary. And so here's the staff report. In November 2014, the district and Mr. Shaver entered into an employment agreement employing Mr. Shaver as the general manager. The district and Mr. Shaver entered into 2 amendments to the employment agreement. The district and Mr. Shaver desire to enter into a third amendment to the employment agreement to increase the general manager's salary to $299,463.07 annually, effective June 17th, 2019. All the other terms and conditions in the employment agreement, as previously amended, remain the same. And the board action, if the board desires to make this, would be by motion to adopt a resolution approving the Third Amendment to the employment agreement between the district and Mr. Shaver. I'll turn it over to the directors now.
Okay, we have the resolution. I would like comments, questions?
None?
Having no
Thank you,
comments or
Commissioners.
questions, I'd like to make the motion as the lead negotiator here that recommend that we adopt this resolution.
I'll second the motion.
Directors Huang, Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. With that, I believe we have no further items in this evening's meeting agenda. And I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you.